Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking about Topping E70 Velvet DAC. And if you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute there, you just reviewed E70 few weeks ago, well, this Velvet part means that this is a different version, the one that doesn't use Sabre DAC chip like the regular E70, but the flagship AK instead. What does that bring to the sound? Stay with me today and find out. So on my left here is the E70 that I've already reviewed, and it comes with a Sabre DAC chip inside. Here what I have in hands at the moment is a Velvet version with AK chip inside. Other than that, everything else is supposed to be the same. The chassis is completely the same, inputs on the back are completely the same, meaning that you have a USB, an optical and coaxial input, also Bluetooth if you want to use that. On the output side of things, there are RCAs, single-ended outs, and XLRs, balanced outputs. Their fronts are also exactly the same. So we have one volume knob, one touch-sensitive button, and big readable OLED display with white digits. So this actually gives us a really unique opportunity to test the same device with the same quality of power supply and analog output section, but with a different DAC chip. And that said, you should know that a Velvet version costs $100 more than the Sabre version. It's simply because the AK chip used in Velvet version is of a higher grade than the one used in a Sabre version. They could have opted for a more expensive Sabre chip too, but they didn't. And just before we move to the sound impressions, I wanted to say that if you want, you can use this one as a preamp, because you do get adjustable volume control, as you can see here on the display. Also, there is a Bluetooth connection on board, but if you're using it only as a DAC and you don't really care about wireless connectivity, my tip to you is go inside of the settings using user manual, because I don't want to describe the process here, and turn off Bluetooth and also put this DAC into a fixed output mode. That means fixed line level output without any attenuation, and while at it, my suggestion for both of these DACs is to change from filter 2 to filter 3. That, judging by the manual, is supposed to be the default filter, but my units both came with preset filter number 2, which is quite okay for the Sabre version, but it's actually more important on AK version. And why is that? Let's talk about it. When I initially connected E70 Velvet into my hi-fi setup, I noticed that the sound is very open and well textured, high in details. Detail retrieval is great, it's airy, but it's kinda polite sounding and dynamically a little bit flat. And that's how AK implementations often sound to my ears. Fortunately, when I switched from filter number 2 to filter number 3, something really important happened. Filter number 3 is fast roll-off, short delay, and it makes everything a little bit sharper and edgier, but for me and my ears and this DAC chip and this DAC device in particular, that's a good thing, because everything just started sounding a little bit faster and more explosive, more dynamic, and not so polite and flat anymore compared to filter number 2, which is a slow roll-off or something like that. You can see all of that in the manual. But I did definitely prefer filter number 3 because it balanced out the detailing and airiness and openness, which were still there, with dynamics and just being fast-paced and more kicky, more slammy, which was introduced by switching to filter number 3. Set like that, in isolation, E70 Velvet sounded really, really good. So I don't want to repeat this too many times, but very airy and open and nice. Tone texture is well present. I really enjoyed listening to vocals and also any acoustic instruments. Everything sounded detailed, but not in a simplistic analytical way that you might remember if you had like some old topping, let's say D50 for example. Okay, that's the worst case scenario for toppings, D50. D50S was better, but it still sounded quite simple and analytical compared to this one, which is much richer in tone timbre and tone texture. It just sounds tonally correct and much fuller than those early topping DACs. And then I switched through several genres. I realized that it's also fast-paced, dynamic, quite clear, and pinpointing of instruments is great. Their separation is definitely great. Everything is arranged really well. And I couldn't notice any particular trait that I would use to describe the sound of this DAC. For just to give you an example of these, would be like very warm and juicy but dark or closed up top. No, none of that. The other example would be very airy and detailed, but you know, it doesn't have weight and juice and pulpability. Well, that might be true for filter number 2, slow roll-off, but when you move to fast roll-off short delay, it's not anymore. It's noticeably improved to my ears, and everything is just quite right. So I quickly moved to comparing it to 2 other DACs. And this time I'll make only 2 comparisons. And if you want to compare it to anything else, just by watching those other 2 reviews, and those DACs compared to a lot of other products, you can just imagine the web, where's what and what's happening. Don't be lazy, please. Don't just type in and want a direct answer and buying advice. Put in some effort, watch at least 3 of my videos and see what happens. I get more views, that's what happens. And you don't feel like a lazy douchebag that just asks. You discovered and connected the dots for yourself and bought yourself the best possible DAC you could. Okay, so moving to comparisons. First one, of course, E70 with a Sabre DAC chip. I already reviewed that one, and I told you that it's quite full sounding and almost warm, and that's unusual for topping, but not lately actually. And when you compare it to Velvet, you notice that the Sabre version of E70 is definitely a little bit darker sounding and more tame in the highs. Also, it has a little bit more bass presence and bass warmth. But that does come at the cost of bass being a little bit less resolute than on Velvet version. It is warmer, but it's just a little bit more blurry and hazy. By itself, it doesn't sound like that. Both of these are really resolving DACs and fast-paced, but Velvet version is even more controlled, and its bass line has slightly more texture, and it's more speedy. Also a little bit more light-footed. And mid-range, almost equally good on both, but Sabre version does get additional warmth from the mid-bass. And it's even fuller compared to Velvet one, which is a little bit leaner, not much, but more open, more airy, more textury. I think that Velvet version is more neutral one of the 2. It's just more revealing, it feels less colored and less influenced by the mid-bass than the Sabre version. And then in the highest part of the frequency spectrum, Velvet again sounds more open and more airy. And that region brings texture to tones too. And if you listen to anything, I don't know, like saxophone or something like that, it will probably sound a little bit more lifelike, and like there's more inner tone details and textures on Velvet version compared to the Sabre version. But all that said, the difference is really not great, and if I compare these two in my headphone setup with Topping A90D headphone amp and many of my headphones, I could barely notice the difference. I still could, but not nearly as much as in my much more revealing room hi-fi setup that I mainly listen to. So do have in mind that they share more things in common than they are different. And they're both great DACs, but to my ears, Velvet version is a little bit more successful in sounding more neutral, and it reveals more details and more air around instruments. And in the process, it sounds a little bit wider and more just airy, more breathy, whereas Sabre version is more cramped towards the center, bolder sounding, warmer sounding, but simply not as spacious as AK version. And the next comparison that I wanted to do, and I suppose all of you expect me to do, is with SMSL SU-9 Pro, which is, for now, my favorite DAC below $500 US. And if you thought that something else is my favorite DAC below $500, it's simply because you didn't watch this review. So, how does E70 Velvet compares to my new favorite? They're awfully close. Now, interesting thing that if you asked me a year ago, I would say no, it's not possible. E70 Velvet sounds a little bit warmer in the mid-range, and it's more just bolder and more physically palpable in the mid-range. And I'm repeating in the mid-range all the time because in the bass they're quite similar. If anything, SMSL has slightly fuller and warmer bass line. E70 Velvets might be a little bit grippier and maybe a little bit better controlled and outlined in the bass section. But once you move to the mid-range, E70 Velvet keeps some sort of boldness and thickness, whereas SU-9 Pro's mid-range quicker gets rid of that warmth, and it sounds a little bit leaner, also a little bit more laid back, less bold, less full, but also a touch more spacious. And if you listen to a vocal, for example something like this one, it will sound a little bit closer to you through the topping, a little bit fuller and warmer. With SU-9 Pro it's more laid back, not by much, just by a little, but it feels outlined with greater precision. And each instrument and each tone with SU-9 Pro feels a little better etched and separated from each other than with E70 Velvet. And because of that, sometimes you do hear a little bit more of spatial cues like reverbs, tone decays, etc. It's not really a big difference because E70 Velvet is also great in exposing these details, but I just feel that SU-9 Pro is a little bit more spacious sounding and just a little bit more precise sounding in the mid-range. And in the highs it feels also just a touch brighter and airier than E70 Velvet. So yeah, funny times. Topping that sounds warmer and more full-bodied in the mid-range than SMSL. So if you're thinking about any of these two, feel free to choose by looking at their features and looks and which brand you fancy more, because they're both really darn good sounding DACs. And I don't like being politically correct. In my head, I'm always right. I know I'm not in reality, but in my head, I am. So I like plain and simple, black and white statement. This is better. But in this case, the difference is so small that I have to be a little bit political. People with different preferences and ears might choose E70 Velvet easily over SU-9 Pro. So where does that leave us with E70 Velvet? It's great sounding, well-balanced, natural sounding, full-bodied. It is a little bit more open and a little bit better sounding than E70, that's a Sabre version, but it's not a night and day difference. It's a subtle improvements over the Sabre version. Is $100 price hike justified? If you're a critical listener, then yes, it is. If you're not, then no, it's not really. Because both of these are great DACs. I personally would say it is. But, you know, I do hi-fi reviews nowadays for a living, so you can already guess that I'm a little bit cuckoo. But yes, if it were me choosing between these two DACs and the budget is not a problem, I would go for the Velvet version. If I was on a tight budget, I would go with just normal E70 without thinking about it twice. By the way, both of these can be purchased on Apple's Audio Store. These are nice guys that send E70 Velvet in for a review. And if you want to help this channel and this hobo YouTuber, use my affiliate link down below the video. I would really appreciate that. That would be all for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. I think it was a fun one because I had a chance to compare two same DACs with the different DAC chips. And yeah, you can notice the difference. It's not huge, but you can definitely notice. And both of these are actually great value DACs. It's just choose your flavor and choose your price point and shoot. Personally, I do prefer Velvet version, but I already said that. So see you next time. Bye.